At the end of the Second Age, the last alliance of elves and men led a desperate assault upon Mordor, in a last-ditch effort to defeat Sauron. And through many great sacrifices, they would emerge victorious. Even though Sauron was defeated, his spirit would survive in a weakened form. And over the next hundreds of years, he would lie low as he slowly restored his power, though he would never forget nor forgive the Dunedain for the part they played in his defeat. They had earned his eternal hatred and anger, and after Sauron had gathered his servants and armies once more, he became hell-bent on hunting down and eradicating all of the heirs of Isildur, until only Aragorn was left. In today's episode, we'll be delving into the history of Aragorn, from his early childhood in Rivendell to the events preceding The Lord of the Rings. Aragorn was born in the year 2931 of the Third Age, and he was the son of Arathorn and Gilrain. Both of his parents were descended of the kings of Arnor, and his father was actually the chieftain of the Dunedain of the North. In those days, the role of chieftain was quite a heavy burden, for the evil servants of Sauron were active once more in Middle-earth, and Arathorn would have to lead his people through many terrible events as their numbers dwindled. Unfortunately, Aragorn would never get to know his father well, for when Aragorn was only 2 years old, Arathorn was slain by an arrow while hunting down a band of orcs with the sons of Elrond. The title of chieftain now fell upon Aragorn, and his mother worried for his safety. She was wise enough to know that Sauron would not stop hunting down the heirs of Isildur until they were all eradicated, and that it was too dangerous to keep Aragorn in these lands. And so Gilrain took him to Rivendell, where he was adopted by Elrond. In order to keep him safe, they decided to hide his true name from him, along with his ancestry, and they called him Estel, which means hope. As the years passed by, Elrond grew to love Aragorn, and he saw him as a son, and he watched with pride as Aragorn grew to become a fair and noble man. Aragorn would sometimes join the sons of Elrond in their travels, and they accomplished many great deeds together, and the time would soon come for Aragorn to learn the truth behind his heritage. When Aragorn was 20 years old, he returned to Rivendell after one such expedition, and Elrond greeted him by calling out his true name, and he told Aragorn the truth behind his noble ancestry. He also gave him the heirlooms of his house, the shards of Narsil, and the ring of Barahir, though Elrond chose to withhold the scepter of Annúminas until Aragorn earned it by becoming king. The news of his true heritage didn't overwhelm Aragorn, even though he was now aware of the great destiny that lay ahead of him. But instead he was in high spirits, for his heart was full of hope. The world around him seemed fair and beautiful, and the following day Aragorn decided to wander alone in the woods of Rivendell, singing the Lay of Lúthien to himself. This song told the story of Beren and Lúthien, two heroes of the First Age, and soon an interesting coincidence would take place. For while Aragorn was singing about how Beren and Lúthien met in the woods of Neldareth, it almost seemed like this song was coming to life, for he came across a beautiful elven maiden. Her name was Arwen, the daughter of Elrond, and for a moment the sight of her left Aragorn speechless, as he gazed at her, trying to make sense of all of this. For it seemed like such a strange coincidence to come across this elven woman while singing the story of Lúthien and Beren. He then cried out to her, calling her Tinuviel, and from that hour Aragorn fell deeply in love with Arwen Undomiel. It might seem strange that Aragorn had never seen Arwen in Rivendell before, and this was actually because she had spent many years in Lothlorien, the land of her mother, and so their paths had not crossed one another. For the next few days, Aragorn fell silent, and his mother noticed this strange behavior, and she questioned him about it, until, at last, he told her about his love for Arwen. Gilrain believed that it was unwise for Aragorn to pursue Arwen, for she doubted that Elrond would approve of Aragorn's love for his daughter, and they might even lose his goodwill, which would doom the line of Isildur. Even though Aragorn tried to follow his mother's advice and set aside his feelings for Arwen, he wasn't able to hide them from Elrond. And one day Elrond called him to his chamber, and they spoke about Arwen's fate. They agreed that a bitter situation lay ahead of them, but it was too early to decide upon it, and until then, Aragorn decided to leave Rivendell and to travel into the wilds. He said farewell to Elrond, to his mother, and to Arwen, and over the next 30 years, Aragorn played a significant part in the resistance against Sauron. One of his early companions was Gandalf, whom Aragorn befriended in the year 2956, and together they went on many perilous journeys, though as the years passed by, Aragorn would more often travel alone. He would take up many different names as he helped the men of various realms, and we know that Aragorn had spent some time among the Rohirrim, riding with them into battle, and he served under the rule of King Tengel, who was Theoden's father. He would eventually make his way to Gondor, where he became known as Taronggil, which meant the Eagle of the Star, for he was swift and keen-eyed, and he wore a silver star upon his cloak. Nobody knew his true name or origin, though he was welcomed in these lands, and he swiftly rose through the ranks of Gondor. The steward of Gondor, called Ectelion, loved Aragorn dearly, for he valued his advice and wisdom, and he even held him in higher esteem than his own son, called Denethor. This would actually cause Denethor to grow jealous of Aragorn, and he disliked him, for he felt that his position was weakened by Aragorn's fame in Gondor, and Denethor grew determined to surpass him in knowledge and information. Despite their differences, Denethor and Taronggil would usually offer the same advice to the steward, and their counsels only differed significantly in one matter. For Taronggil had warned Ectelion to put his trust in Gandalf rather than Saruman, while Denethor advised against this. It's believed that after Denethor succeeded his father as steward, he managed to discover the true identity of Taronggil, and he suspected that his time in Gondor was part of a plot that was designed by Gandalf to supplant Denethor from power, which is why he bore very little love towards Gandalf the White. While Aragorn was in Gondor, he would often counsel the steward not to underestimate the threat of the corsairs and the devastation that they could wreak upon the southern lands of Gondor. He would eventually gather a small fleet, and, with the steward's blessing, Aragorn led a surprise attack upon the corsairs, and he set fire to a great part of their fleet. He would even fight and overthrew the captain of the corsairs in this battle, and this battle was hailed as one of the greatest victories in Gondor's recent history, for they had achieved tremendous success while suffering very little in losses. Taronggil's name was now praised and renowned in Gondor, though Aragorn refused to return to Minas Tirith, and he sent a messenger to Ectelion, informing him that he must now focus on other tasks at hand. It was now time for his most dangerous journey yet, for he was determined to travel through the lands of Sauron and into the far east and south, realms which were occupied by men in service to Sauron. Aragorn hoped to explore and understand the hearts of men, both good and evil, and he was determined to uncover and unravel the plots and devices of the servants of Sauron. All of these tough and challenging experiences would slowly take a toll upon Aragorn, and he became somewhat grim to look upon, for his face was sad and stern from the doom that lay upon him. Yet even so, hope ever dwelt in the depths of his heart, and his eyes were filled with a light that few could endure. He became the hardiest of living men, skilled in many crafts and lore, and he was also elven-wise thanks to his youth in Rivendell. By now, Aragorn had begun to miss his childhood home, for he had spent 28 long years away from Rivendell, and he hoped to return to this land in order to rest from his burdens. During his journey home, he would travel past the borders of Lothlorien, and Galadriel invited him into her realm, where she gave him new robes in silver and white, along with a bright gem for his brow, and Aragorn now looked like a great elf lord rather than a mortal man. A wonderful surprise awaited him beneath the golden canopies of Lothlorien, for it happened that Arwen was also spending some time in this land, and their paths crossed each other once more, and she was instantly smitten by this noble man that lay before her. A great love would grow between them in this peaceful land, where they spent an entire season together. Eventually, their bond grew so strong that Arwen professed that she was ready to forsake her immortality and take up a mortal life, if it meant that she could be with him, and Aragorn would give her the Ring of Barahir as a token of their love. Arwen's choice would devastate her father, and even though Elrond accepted her decision, he told Aragorn that he must become the king of both Arnor and Gondor before he could marry his daughter. While all of this was happening, Aragorn was still the chieftain of the Rangers of the North, and these men would constantly watch over the lands of Eryador, securing them from the evils that lurked outside. It was a thankless job, for the men of these lands didn't appreciate how their safety was only possible thanks to the Rangers' vigilance, and they would actually treat them with disdain, seeing them as vagabonds, and they gave them scornful names. In the year 3001, Gandalf would start to suspect that Bilbo's ring might actually be the one ring of power, and he enlisted the help of the Rangers to double their guard over the Shire. He also sought out Aragorn's help, and he asked him to look out for any news regarding the whereabouts of Gollum. Aragorn would return to the north 6 years later, to pay a final visit to his mother before she passed away from old age. The evils of Middle-earth daunted her, and her final words to her son were, "I give hope to the Dunedain. I have kept no hope for myself," which seems to be a reference to Aragorn's old name, Estelle, which meant hope. Aragorn believed that it was his personal responsibility to find Gollum and to solve the mystery of the One Ring. For as a descendant of Isildur, it fell upon him to fix his ancestors' mistakes. And so Gandalf and Aragorn would renew their hunt for Gollum in the year 3009. They searched for any sign of him in the valleys of the Anduin, the lands of Mirkwood and Rhovanion, and they would even go so far as the confines of Mordor, for they had heard rumours that Gollum dwelt in the dark hills of those lands. And yet, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find any sign of Gollum. And since time was of the essence, they decided to part ways. Gandalf would travel to Minas Tirith to search through the ancient records of Gondor for any information on the One Ring, while Aragorn would keep up the search for Gollum. Little did they know that Gollum was actually being kept captive and tortured for information in the dungeons of Barad-dûr, and Sauron would eventually let him go in the hopes that he would lead his servants to the One Ring in his relentless pursuit of it. This would prove to be a grave mistake on Sauron's part, for Aragorn would come across Gollum's tracks as he passed along the outskirts of the Dead Marshes, and he managed to capture him after following this trail. Aragorn tried to interrogate him, though Gollum refused to cooperate or to speak with him, and he struggled and bit his captor, and Aragorn decided to take him to Mirkwood and to hand him over to the elves of that land. It was clear to Aragorn that the spies of Sauron would be looking out for Gollum, and he would have to take an unconventional path to avoid detection. And so he led Gollum through the north end of the Emyn, and they crossed the River Anduin before travelling north through the outskirts of the forest of Fangorn. This led them close to the borders of Lothlorien, and Aragorn asked the elves of that land to send out messengers to Gandalf, informing him that Gollum was captured and that he was being taken to Mirkwood. Aragorn and Gollum would finally cross the River Anduin once more with the help of the Beornings, and they finally managed to reach Mirkwood. This journey had taken them 50 days to complete, and throughout their travels they had managed to remain undetected by the spies of Sauron until they reached the forest. For Mirkwood was filled with the evil servants of Sauron, though by then it was too late for them to intercept and capture Gollum, for he was already in the safe keeping of the elves. Gandalf and Aragorn would then proceed to interrogate Gollum together, and later that year Gandalf informed Aragorn of Frodo's plan to leave the Shire, and he asked him to keep watch for him, and eventually Aragorn would meet the hobbits in Bree. So, this wraps up today's episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. What do you think about Aragorn's early history? And would you like to see it made into a movie or series sometime? It's quite interesting to see his early life, and how dedicated he was to helping the various factions in Middle-earth, from his time in Rohan, Gondor, and even the far-off lands in the east and south. As always, we'd like to give a quick shout-out to all the patrons that choose to support this channel. Your help makes this channel possible, and your support is deeply appreciated. Particularly the Valar tier patrons, Jacob Williams, Michael Angel, and T. Gorman, and the Wizard tier patrons, James Stodgel, Andrew Burma, Mike Feeney, Roland Meervold, Tamar Baines, and Eleanor. If you too would like to help and support this channel while unlocking some cool perks, we'll be leaving a link to the Patreon page in the video description. You can also support this channel by checking out our store and by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and joining our Discord server. All of these links can be found in the video description. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to join our fellowship today. Until next time, when we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.